Shalom, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you. We're another night on NETIV. This one's a little bit different than normal because, first off, you won't hear my voice the entire time. I've brought a friend. I've had a friend for a long time, although most people don't recognize that I have friends, but I do have friends.
Oh
And
yeah.
the one I've got is now talking a little bit. But I want to talk about is October 7th and the red heifer. Now, all of you remember, if you will, I taught the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, we came to chapters 9, 10, and 11 in the book of Daniel. And there, what happened to it? There it is. I showed you a map. Here it is. Here's the map that I showed you. Basically, Daniel's 70 weeks. If you literally take 70 weeks and call them sabbatical weeks, you have 50 times 70, which takes you from the very first day Israel entered the land in 1406 BCE, all the way to October 7th, 2024. That's the map that we're following. Now, according to the map, we've reached the end of the time of the Gentiles, as I would understand it. Now we are speaking specifically about Israel. And so as we're looking at that, I want us to understand that what we're really looking at is those events that are going to be taking place. Now, living in the United States, one is not privileged to hear all of what's going on in Israel.
That's true.
And because we don't hear everything that's going on in Israel, we find ourselves trying to make sense out of what's going on. On January 10th of this year, Hamas spokesman Abu Abadi came on the air and began to explain the reason why they attacked Israel on October 7th. And the reason is because they are attempting to preempt Israel from destroying the Temple Mount and beginning sacrifices again on the Temple Mount. That's what's trying to happen. Now, I've been listening all week long to various reports that I can find. I've even listened to the Muslims. Found one that was speaking English where he began to share with me and share with those who were listening an understanding. The understanding is quite unusual because it speaks to a different understanding of scriptures. Now, remember, the Quran begins with the first 5 books of Genesis. It doesn't deal all of our first 5 books of the Bible. It doesn't deal with all of them, but Genesis is there. And so is Numbers is there, and so is Exodus there. What isn't there are some of the particulars. And when it comes to particulars, the one that's the most significantly left out is Passover. Passover does not appear in the Quran. And because it doesn't appear in the Quran, the understanding of needing to build this temple and all that goes with it is lacking. But it begins by talking about the fact that God would never have performed Passover. First off, God would not simply destroy the firstborn just because. God is not a God of revenge. God did not need blood on the doorposts in order to recognize the Jewish people. The Quran indicates that Moses' plan was to sneak out of Egypt under the cover of darkness, so they would never have needed that. And the final point of that is the only miracle that God needed was the miracle at the Red Sea, where he drowned the Egyptian army. So when we go back to looking at what's going on, one of the things that's happening, or what we should see happening, is the fact that they begin to deal with, well, the Bible differently. Now, they still have several people there. Hold on a second. Some of you guys are still unmuted, so if you'd mute yourself, that'd be appreciated.
I got it. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So anyway, as we're going through this whole process of understanding, please be aware that the Muslims accept Jesus Christ. They accept him as being a prophet. They accept Muhammad as a prophet. They accept Abraham as a prophet. They have all of the prophets. But in the course of their understanding, Israel is not going to survive. It will be the Muslim world. In fact, there's several sites that are out right now where they talk about this is the end of the Muslim, or the end of Israel. But this whole thing really began 3 years ago. It began in Texas, and it began specifically at a ranch that's not far outside of Dallas. It's called the Trinity Cross Ranch. And at this ranch that they had, the rabbis sent some Americans over to look for red heifers. Now, a red heifer is actually, if we're looking at it from a typically just a cattle point of view, is a red Angus cow. That's what they're looking at. They came over, found the cattle. There were 18 of them that were just calved, just born. All 18 appeared to qualify, but there's no way to take 18 calves back to Israel. So they began to narrow it down. And so they finally decided among 8. But then they tried to get them shipped across the ocean. The only problem is the United States will not allow cattle to be shipped to Israel. So they had to come up with another possibility. Their choice was to actually reduce it to 5, and they didn't send cattle over, they sent their pets over. What they did was they simply took these 5 cows and they began to treat them as their pet for a week. They petted them, they treated them like they belonged in the house. Then they loaded them on the plane and shipped them off to Israel. And that's how they got there. And that was 2 years ago. Now the calves are no longer calves. After the 3rd year, and according to the Jewish understanding, the 3rd year, 3rd month, to guarantee that they were old enough, they are now called heifers. No longer are they called calves. And so they are now ready to be used in order to begin what they call, or what the extreme Israelis call, the time for the sacrifice of the red heifer, in order to begin worship again. Well, I know a little bit about it, but I want to share with you Larry Borntager. Larry has been in Israel. He and I have gone to Israel twice. He's been there every year since, 1988 or something like that, Larry? So you're going to have to unmute yourself again if you can. But anyway, as he's going through the whole process of finding his unmute button.
There. Okay.
There you go. Okay. So let's begin, if you will. You've been on this hunt for the red heifer since the early 90s. Is that right?
Actually, May 23rd, 1988 is where it got introduced to the idea that there was anything like a red heifer.
So being introduced means what?
Well, everybody listening in knows more about the red heifer than I did at that time. But I knew I was supposed to be in Israel, May 23rd, 1988. I thought it was to celebrate Israel's 40th year, as a developing country again. As I was leaving the convention center where we were meeting, this complete stranger started walking with me, and he was saying something about he came from a dig for the ashes of the red heifer. Well, me being a practical farm kid, I just was thinking out loud, not to him, but just, I don't know, to God or whoever, had a practical question. How do you know they're going to be ashes of a heifer? Are they going to moo at you or what? Now, usually when I hear God's voice, it's very nice. This time it was rather pointed. This isn't funny business. This is something I'm doing. I said, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. Well, this complete stranger, I always like to say people's names that I know they don't mind, Del Griffin, because God uses individuals, is what I discovered. he said, "You want to see the dig?" And I said, "Well, sure." So that's how we got introduced to Vendel Jones when we went out to Qumran and May 23rd, 1988. That was the first time I even knew there was anything like a red heifer. And first time I even knew there was somebody looking for the ancient ashes of the red heifer that still would have come from the cow that Moses and Eleazar would have first burned. So, yeah, that was my introduction.
You went out to the dig and you met Vendel. What made Vendel go out looking for the ashes of the red heifer? Do you remember the story you were telling me?
Well, he said he goes back to the time he was in his mom's tummy. He said that she would roll up a newspaper and read the Tanakh the Torah, I guess, yeah, the Torah over and over again through this rolled up newspaper while he was still in her tummy. So he said he started before he was born with sort of a idea that there's something there to be aware of. So when he was there in 1967 during the Six-Day War, he made friends with some of the army people because of his color blindness. He was able to pick out Jordanian camouflage, and he helped the Israeli tanks take care of the Jordanians where they couldn't even see where they're at. So he became a very well-liked person among the army IDF. So anyhow, they gave him permission to sort of drive around Israel wherever he wanted to go. And he always thought there should be some record of the idea that Jeremiah was warned by God to hide the things of the temple and the tabernacle somewhere out in the Jordan Valley area. So that's where he started looking, and for some reason, he wasn't a treasure hunter. He was looking for a bowl of ashes. So that was always his goal when I first met him, that it was to dig for the ashes of the red heifer. So, yeah, that was his goal, to try to find that bowl of ashes.
For those people who are going to listen or are listening now, Vendel was not always B'nai Noach. Vendel began his life as a Baptist. His mom was a Baptist. He actually went to Dallas Theological Seminary for a while. He then went over to Israel. But in the process, I found fascinating when I sat with Larry and Vendel in, I think it was Larry's house. We were sitting there talking, and he began to share with us some amazing stories. The fact that he could sit on a hillside and look across the Dead Sea into the area of Jordan and could see the camouflage units. He also ended up, I guess, was so close, he ended up losing part of his hearing. Isn't that right? Because he became deaf.
Yes. He didn't understand Hebrew too well at that time. So he was out front with binoculars pointing out where the camouflage was. And they warned, fire or whatever in Hebrew. And he didn't understand it. And he was right in front of the tank, and the shell going off, ruined his hearing. Yeah.
So anyway, he began that way. But how did he get down into the Qumran Valley? Talk to us about his first wife and how she helped him with the copper scroll.
Well, actually, would have been his second wife. Lois was his first wife. She passed away. She wouldn't have had any Hebrew input as far as a copper scroll, but then he married an Israeli gal, Sahaba, and she, of course, was fluent in Hebrew. So she would read the book that was translated from the original Franciscan priests that actually were involved in the dig, and she kept finding mistakes in the translation. And the sense later on that it was actually not mistakes, but they did it yeah, on purpose so that people wouldn't head out there looking for treasures is sort of what they came up with. So yeah, Sahaba helped quite a bit as far as um, understanding the Copper Scroll. But at that time, it's another whole story. But Pesach Bardon was actually involved. He was an archaeologist, Israeli, during the time that Jordan was actually in charge of that area. But he had permission to do some excavating along that line. So that's where Wendell started walking the valley. And, the Copper Scroll was found in 52, but it wasn't made public or wasn't translated until sometime later. But he had enough of the Copper Scroll that he was walking down that area, and in the Copper Scrolls it says, in the desolations of the Valley of Achor, between Jericho and Sukkah by the Wadi Hakipa, that's what I call the X and the Y, that there's different people that I hear or see that are also using the Copper Scroll. They have the X, but not the Y. And the reason Wendell found the Y, he said Pesach Bardon had names of wadis, but he couldn't find all the wadis. And Wendell found the wadi without a name. And when you look on top of the wadi, it had sort of like a kippah top on it. So that's, to me, is the X and the Y. And then the Copper Scrolls describes, a cave with a column, which when you were there, you could see it was like a 2-mile cave. So that was the process that Wendell went through, simply walking that area, and Pesach Bardon helping him to locate what I call the X and the Y in order to place the Copper Scroll on the ground, as Wendell would say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of it. If you stop to think all the things that happened in that area, I mean, the Essenes were just to the north of that. You had across, you could actually see the Valley of the Passengers, which is spoken of in Ezekiel 38 and 39. You can see the Gilgal, where they originally crossed and sat up their first tents, which is another story I want you to relate to them about King Solomon. What's so special about the land where Gilgal was originally placed? Do you remember?
Yes. The Copper Scroll says behind 40 placed stones, there's the Mishkan, or the tabernacle. And some of the rabbis that Wendell was working with said if it's God's will, Hashem's timing, if the tabernacle comes out, where should it go to? And according to, and okay, I'm not a scholar like you are, but Amos, Hosea, there's different places where God says that he will woo Israel out into the wilderness as in the days of her youth when she first came in out of Egypt, and meet with her there. Well, meeting with his people always included the tabernacle. That was the meeting place. So they said, if it's God's will and timing, if the tabernacle comes out, it should go back to Gilgal. So they asked him if he could find Gilgal. And again, I realize there's always different opinions, but this is just what I'm saying, what happened when we were looking for it. When Wendell went to get permission from the IDF in the area, his ex-Army buddy said, no way, they won't give you permission to go out there. It's right along the border of Jordan's, the military fence there. And but Wendell being Wendell, he went ahead and tried. Well, there just happened to be a kippah wearing archaeologists with the IDF Army at the point. And I guess they always have an archaeologist, because if they go into a new area, the IDF, then there's an archaeologist says, no, don't take your tanks over there. Be careful there. There might be an archaeologist there. So anyhow, he said, well, this is too interesting. Give him permission. So we got permission from the IDF in the area. We had a military escort out just north of the Dead Sea, because somebody from NASA told Wendell that there is a satellite photograph process that will register 1/700th of a degree difference in temperature. So if you would go in your backyard and let's say there was an Indian path 5 feet under the soil, even 1,000 years ago, the compaction of that soil is still different than right next to it. So at the end of the day, when the sun's rays, heat up the soil and then it cools off, it can be 1/700th of a degree difference, and that it'll show up on a film. You run it through a computer, and you can see where all of these things are. So using that satellite photograph, north of the Dead Sea, there was definitely an area that was different than anything else. So we went into that area. They took us through a minefield, and you could see the Jordanian military fence right next to us. 6 of us had our, what we call anomaly rods. Do people need to be educated about anomaly rods, Steve, or do they know what that is?
No, they live in the city, so they probably don't know as much as you do. Well, some of them do.
Okay.
I know Rod grew up in the farm, but that's beside the point. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead and
Anyhow.
explain it. It's important.
Okay. If you look for water, people use peach branches or whatever, but a person can also use bent wires and just hold it in your hand. And if the magnetic field is disturbed in the ground that you walk over, and you sort of gear your mind, your brain.
Ross is showing you some now. You see Ross.
Okay.
Ross, talk so you can show on the screen. Show it to people so they can see what it is. There you go.
Okay, these are top.
There. That's it.
That's it.
What we had. Thank you. Better to see it than try to explain it. So 6 of us had those, and we all had people behind us with flags. We had no idea what we were going to find. As we started walking, those would cross because they detected a certain disturbance in the soil, and they'd put a flag down. And pretty soon the flag started sort of lining up, and it went up towards north, towards Jericho, and there was a pile of stones there. Well, the thing is, that was nothing but clay there. So when you see stones, it's like, oh, that's what we were looking for, probably. So off to the east of that little bit, we did uncover stones that were laid together without cement or anything. It was about 20 some inches high, 20 inches wide. Well, then you have to ask a practical question. Something like that, did it keep animals in? No. Did it keep animals out? No. It was the gedera, or the wall around the area of the tabernacle, because the warning was that if people got too close, the best way I can say is that the Shekinah glory of Hashem was so strong it would sort of like suck out the souls of the people. That's my practical farm kid way of saying it. So anyhow, but what was amazing, I was walking around on the inside, and there was definitely a wall around the area. On the south side, there were like 2 walls running parallel, and in the middle of that, I detected with my rods like an altar with, I could see the ramp going up to it and everything. But there, in between, after that, on the south, it was like a whole bunch of pens, and I said, this looks more like a cattle corral than what I would expect it. And then I thought, well, yeah, they were camping out. They still had to have their animals with them. They also had to set them aside to make sure they were okay for sacrifice. So practically speaking, that made sense to me, that there were like pens out there where they kept the animals in. But then also I found circle things with spokes. Again, just using my anomaly rods, nothing. Well, yeah, we did use scientific methods too. Somebody was there. But I found like 4 big circles with spokes, and they're about 6 feet in diameter, or across. Yeah. So I asked Vendel, what is that all about? He says, well, if you read about it, that Solomon went down to this area because the clay was good for forming to make the things of the temple. And it was so heavy that they also cast wheels, and then they sort of put them together and put these things on these wheels and rolled them up, to the temple mount. So the guy that was with us, forget his name, he had instruments that also detected the same thing, and he was sort of laughing at our anomaly rods until his instruments agreed with what we were finding. And what we were finding was hardened clay. And he was sort of puzzled because, said, according to the instruments, it's clay like everything around it, but it's a different stage. So Vendel said, "You mean like fired clay?" And he said, "Yeah, that's probably it." Then Vendel said, "Well, his understanding is if they would have formed the the things for the temple down there and then poured the molten metal in it, it would have baked the clay." So technically, if we'd have the right to dig that up, you could probably find all the pieces, if you could put them together and come up with exactly the same things that they made for the temple. But what was interesting, after that evening that what we say we discovered Gilgal, we went up to Kfar Lamim, and Rabbi Grosvenor said, "You realize what day it is on the Hebrew calendar?" We said, "No." It was the 10th day of the first month. And if you read in Joshua, after Moses' breath was taken, God tells Joshua to take the children of Israel and they cross the Jordan River and they camped at Gilgal on the 10th day of the first month. And that's exactly the day that we found this. So again, there's nothing scientific behind that, but it's just one of those things where, like I say, there's other opinions where Gilgal is, but if the tabernacle comes out, that's where I think it should go to personally. So
Okay,
that's the Gilgal story.
Let me add to the Gilgal story. In the book of Amos, chapter 9, it begins in the 9th verse of Amos 9. It says, "For behold, I decree that I will shake out the house of Israel from among the nations, as grain is shaken in a sieve, and not a pebble falls to the ground, and they will perish by the sword, and the sinners of my people, those who say, not because of us will the evil approach us any sooner. But on that day, I will raise up the fallen booth of David. I will repair the breaches and raise up its ruins, and I will build it up as in the days of old, and so that upon whom my name is called may inherit the remnant of Edom and all the nations, and the word of Hashem, who shall do this. Behold, the days are coming, the word of Hashem, when the plowman will meet the reaper." That's when we find in the coming days when things will grow so fast and be harvested the same day they're grown. That's yet future, but it's in those days. So we're now entering that time. We know Israel's back in the land. We also know that there's a lot of things that are going on, but we also know that it's in these days that they're going to find something. The thing that you're looking for, Larry, was the ashes of the red heifer. And that's where you're at this point in time. And that's where I want to keep you. I want you to talk to me first about what's the purpose in having these ashes?
Well, again, being a practical farm kid, I always hear the idea of the ashes is so hard to understand that even Solomon couldn't understand it. And I kept saying, come on, God, there's got to be a practical thing here somewhere. So in 1994, when we discovered what we call Gilgal, we didn't have cell phones back then. We sent, what do you call it? The phone, come on, at my age, words don't always come, but anyhow, I wanted to send a message to Meredith, my wife, and Vendel wanted to send one too. So I went and sent my message, and then I left the building, and I was walking outside on this gravel, just like a alleyway, and I saw this guy bending over. It looks like he had about 3 pieces of plywood painting something white on it. And I thought, oh, probably maintenance guy, painting signs. But when I got up there, the white turned clear, and there were beautiful paintings. So I asked him, what he was doing. He said he's a Kabbalistic painter, and he paints these Kabbalistic pictures and sends them all over the world. And he said, "You want to see some more?" So I said, "Well, sure." So I went into this old Quonset building, and yeah, it was lined with all kinds of wonderful paintings. Came to this one and had a picture, 3 stages of a lady, and the center one, she was dressed in red, and it looked like a sheep's head had come out of her stomach. So I asked him, "What's that one with the sheep's head?" He said, "No, no, no, no. That's not a sheep's head. That's the red heifer." So he goes through the process, says, "This is Israel when first came out of Egypt. This is Israel as they were wandering in the wilderness and the history of Israel. This is Israel today, and that's the red heifer, and it's time she is found." And I said, "Oh, wait a minute here." So I went over, and Vendel was done sending his message, said, "Hey, Vendel, come over here once." So he came over there and asked this Kabbalistic painter to go through that picture again. And he said, "Yeah, this was Israel then. Now this is Israel today, and that's the red heifer. It's time she was found." Well, if people know Bendel, he just sort of stood, "Yeah, we're looking for her," just matter of factly. That poor rabbi had a hard time keeping his feet on the floor. He was so excited because, a lot of these rabbis know many things that are supposed to happen. But they never share much about the future, even if they know prophetically, because they say if you focus on the future too much, you miss today. And today is what is important. So then he proceeded to say something, and it made sense to me. He said, most of the time when there's sacrifices, they're bulls. And this isn't a sacrifice, it's a burning. That's one word that I really want to get out to people. If people use the phrase, when are the heifers going to be sacrificed? They're not a sacrifice like the others. They're being burned. So he said the reason it's a female is because if you go back in the very beginning of God creating, if he would have just created a man and a woman, that's it. That would have been it. But no, within the male, there's a hidden potential that you can't see. But a woman takes that hidden potential and 9 months later shows the reality of it. And he said the same way, you can understand that in a natural sense. But he said, and often you hear that God hides himself. He said, when the ashes of the heifer are being used, then everything from creation till now that was hidden, the same way as the female takes the hidden reality of a male and then presents the actual, how would you say, the actual fact of it. He said the same way that everything that was hidden from creation till now will be revealed. And to me, that's where the tabernacle will come in, that he'll use the tabernacle to reveal some of those things, because like in Ezekiel, and again, I'm always open up to my Jewish friends to correct me, but so far, I think I've been right. Most people, when they read Ezekiel 37:27, when Ezekiel repeats what God says, when my sanctuary is in the midst of Israel, then the nations will know that I, the Lord God, do sanctify Israel. And usually, the focus is on the temple. But if you read Ezekiel 37, it reads a little different to me. So that's where, and it's one of those things that I don't want to have, I would say that it's not broadcast all over. I see the possibility of the tabernacle coming out of the behind forty-place stones. And the thing is, I wouldn't touch those things if they come out. Not just any Jewish person would touch them. Only the Levites would, but they wouldn't do it without the ashes of the red heifer. So it all ties together after these thousands of years, the possibility that last November we were hoping to open up the caves, but because of the Gaza situation, it was put off. So we're hoping to do it, this pretty soon, I'll put it that way. That after these thousands of years, that it looks like we're so close to find the ancient ones. And for me, I find myself taking care of the potential new ones. So that's my what I've been involved in. Yeah. So
Okay,
anyhow,
well, before you talk about that, let me read you another scripture from the book of Ezekiel from the previous chapter. It begins in verse number 24. I will take you from among the nations and gather you from all the lands, and I will bring you to your own soil. Then I will sprinkle pure water upon you, and that you may become cleansed, and I will cleanse you from all the contamination and from all the idols. Then I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit within you. I will remove the heart of stone and your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you, and I will make it so that you will follow my decrees, guard my ordinances, and fulfill them. The ashes of the red heifer, that's what's going to cause the contamination to go away. That's how significant they are. Now, before he goes into talking about the ashes of the red heifer and how he works with the cattle, Larry's been there working with the cattle, but I want to share with you one other thing before we go. October 7th, we began this process. The Arabs now agree that part of this battle is about is to keep the Israelis from actually beginning to build their temple. There are extremist rabbis who have already purchased land on Mount Olives for the purposes of sacrificing the red heifer. That
burning.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so used to.
Yeah.
So anyway, now that I've been corrected, no, the idea is that before they can burn that heifer, they got to get it there, but they've got the land for it, and they're trying to, again, the extremists are intending to build the tabernacle or build the temple, and so they think they need to get this whole thing started. If you go back to the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, when you go back there, you're going to the Second Temple period. You're going to the time when they're going to be built, when they wanted to build the temple. Remember, Cyrus gave them permission to go back to the land. Many of them did, not a lot, but many of them did. And they began by building the altar. They found the location, they built the altar, and everybody scattered. They went and started building their own homes and taking care of that. They later will come back and they're beginning to work on construction of the temple. But in order to build the temple, they're in tough times because all of their Arab neighbors, according to Ezra 4, do not want it to happen. So therefore, they put up a big fuss. Eventually, they get Ahasuerus to stop the building. But again, Darius, who follows him, who was Esther's son, allows them to begin to build this thing. Once he begins to build this thing, the Arabs begin to fight. They begin to try to attack the whole thing so that the temple cannot be built. But in order for the temple to be consecrated, what did they need? They have to have the ashes of the old red heifers and the new heifer that they found. So that was one of those conditions that's never mentioned in the scriptures. It's in the Talmud, but it's not in the scriptures. So we have to understand there's a process that they've got to go through, but right now, many of them believe that they don't need any of the old ashes. They'll just take the new ones and start over again, and that'll be it. Now, according to the Talmud, Rabbi Meir says that there have been 7 sacrificed, and this will be the 8th. Ramban, who many of them support, believe that this is the 10th one that's going to be here, and the Messiah is the one who will actually help in slaughtering it. Now, the Messiah can't slaughter it because of the fact that he is from the tribe of Judah. They needed an Eleazar, somebody from Aaron's clan, to be responsible for that. So there's a lot of circulating going on right now, trying to get everything to fit together. That's what Larry's over there working on making it all fit together. So as soon as Larry gets it all figured out and we can get it all put back together again, life will be good. But right now, we're going through all of this. Israel is under attack from 3 directions, 4 directions at one time, and we're seeing a lot of things going on in Israel. Now, Larry's had the responsibility, well, he took on the responsibility while he was there to actually care for the heifers. I want you to talk about Sweet Corn Charlie and how you ended up working in Shiloh with the cattle.
Yes, I always like to mention people's names. Yeah, Sweet Corn Charlie, Chuck and Tammy Moeller, amazing people. They also wanted to be on the dig that I was planning for last November. But again, since the Gaza situation, he has many friends because he visits many farmers and gets ideas from Israel how to help his produce, what he sells. He has about, I forget how many, at least.
Audio,
Pardon?
is that just me or everybody else?
You're breaking up, Rod. I can't. He could.
Okay.
Oh,
I think he's breaking up too. Go ahead and try it again.
okay. Chuck and Tammy, they have they sell produce. They grow their own. He's known for the best sweet corn in the area, but they were
This
over
is back
there.
in Indiana. Back in Indiana.
Yes, northern Indiana. People come from probably 100 miles away to buy his sweet corn. So anyhow, he's got many friends in Israel. So, Rod, can you hear me now? It's coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay. So anyhow, they were over there and they asked me, do you want to go see the red heifers? And I said, you mean you know where they're at? Because I knew they were in northern Israel somewhere, but I really didn't know how to even start looking for them. They said, yeah, more or less they're at Shiloh. So we went up there, and us being farm kids, when we saw these heifers, and I try to say it very nicely, but they weren't being taken care of. They were laying in their own manure, about 5-6 inches thick, and they were just caked with their manure. So we asked if we could clean out the pens, and the wonderful people up there, Mariah, a wonderful lady who's really in charge of that ancient Shiloh, she was just so happy because they didn't have the money. Usually they hire somebody with a tractor and a bucket to clean it out. So we said, no, we can do it. So we got the equipment, the shovels, the manure forks and everything. And took us, I think, 5-6 hours, but we got it done. It was hard work. But Chuck and Tammy, they just, they really, were really good helpers. We all did it together. But then I said, well, it's going to be the same problem again unless we get the proper bedding. And since I'm going to live by the Sheva Mitzvot, the rabbi said that I have the right to touch the cows and nobody else is really supposed to touch them, just, for safety's sake. So the way they were caked, I thought, this is going to be quite a job. Probably have to, soap them down and brush them and everything. But once we gave them the proper bedding, they're cleaning themselves up, and now I'm very happy. They're just nice and clean and look quite nice. Then the other thing is the hay that they were getting. I don't even call it hay. It was like mature wheat straw that had weeds in it that actually caused problems with the cow's teeth and eating, and it had rocks in it. And Chuck and Tammy and I just looked at that and we just shuddered and said, what would happen if a cow would happen to chomp into one of those stones and break a tooth? So we got the old hay out of the barn, and Chuck and Tammy, God bless them, they bought enough hay to last for a year. It's better. It's a clover hay, but again, I guess like somebody said, a lot of these Israeli farmers are first generation, and they wait to harvest the hay, like the clover, until it's about 3 feet tall. And then it's, loses all the leaves, clover blossoms, and the bottom are almost like hard twigs. But it's actually had a smell to it, and it was much better. So now they have better feed. I'm still looking for better like clover hay or whatever, if I can find it over there. And so, yeah, at least now they have proper bedding. They're cleaning up. They have better feed. I just want to get a mineral block to them yet. And so, yeah, they're well taken care of now. And the other thing, well, see, they used to be up north in a farm, but they just were thinking that for safety's sake, you almost have to have them in a more secure place. Where they're at now, they're behind a steel door. Everything is under lock and key, and you have to have a code number to even get in to work with them. So what we also saw as farm kids, they were sort of fighting among each other. They'd just ram each other in the stomach like something terrible. Well, the problem was the feed bunk, they had like two pens, one on the left side, one on the right side. They would put hay on the one feed bunk and the right side, and they go fighting, all five of them, and try to get to the hay. Then you put hay on the other side, on the left side, and go fighting, get there. So just like fighting all the time. So Chuck and Tammy and I said, let's move the feed bunks together. And then that way they can all stand in a row and they don't have to fight. Now I have some great pictures. They lick each other instead of fighting each other. So, just little things like that we just feel much better with practical knowledge of how to take care of animals and how to treat them and how to get them used. If there's, they're special animals, they should be presentable. And that's where I feel they are right now. So that's where I feel accomplished.
Now,
Yeah.
Shiloh, where you're talking about, was the city where the tabernacle was set up after leaving Gilgal and all of those other places. That's where our stories in the book of Samuel come from, is up at Shiloh, where the tabernacle sat. And now they have a permanent building that they call their tabernacle. It's where we went to visit those kids, if I remember correctly. That's the area where you're talking about, right?
Yes, yeah. Where David had his school. David and his sons were attacked by terrorists, and
they built a school. They built a school for kids who have lost their parents because of the intifadas.
Yeah,
it's an amazing school.
Yeah, also any kind of terrorist situation where children need to have help. So it's a very interesting place. And if you look at Shiloh, Moriah, the lady that I worked with directly at the ancient Shiloh, she has a picture of her mother holding her back in, I think it was 1973. There was nothing there. So for these families to go to an area like that and have a vision of what should happen there now today, it's it's amazing what's there now. And that's where the tabernacle was there for about, they say, 369 years. From Gilgal up to that area. So there's a lot of meaningful history up there. And to me, the heifers are in the right location right now.
And they remind me what location they're actually in. Which tribe are they actually a part of?
They're actually in the area that you say of Ephraim. But the thing I always like to say, if you look at Genesis 49, 10, where Jacob is given the blessing to his sons. Again, there's different opinions, but I'm just a practical farm kid idea. I stand there at Shiloh, where the red heifers are, and I read in the blessing there, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. Okay, we're in Ephraim's area, but the Jewish people take their name from the tribe of Judah, nor a scholar from among his descendants until Shiloh arrives. And again, I realize there's different opinions on that. I disagree with Rashi on that, but anyhow, I stand there and hold this. I'm at Shiloh. Now, the next thing I see, it says something like in this translation, and his will be an assembly of nations. I just can't get over it. There I am looking at that future, because it says, gather yourselves, assemble yourselves, and I will tell you what will befall you in the end of days. So it's quite a bit later on than at the time he was giving this prophecy or blessings to his sons. So here I am standing at Shiloh. I look at that. The nations are coming from all over the world. When I was up, there were some from Papua New Guinea. There were some from South Korea. There were some from China, Japan, South America, South Africa, Hawaii. I mean, all over the world. There are nations coming to Shiloh to see the red heifers. And Mariah reads directly, from the Torah. And there's two things that I encouraged her, that if those two things, that the people from the nations are coming to Shiloh to look at the red heifers, because there's something that I noticed that she didn't notice. As I stand there, sometimes people will make a recording, and they will come to this place in Numbers 19, where the idea is that it'll be this idea later on. God says it'll be a eternal decree. But in Numbers 19, 9, towards the end, it's for water sprinkling, it is for purification. But what I hear, sorry, Christians, they add something to the Torah, which is not a wise thing to do. They add for sin at the end of that. And it isn't for sin. It's not a sacrifice. If you look down through there, it's always burning, a burning, a burning. And it's for purification. It has nothing to do with sin. So I just told Mariah that when the nations come there, if they could be made aware of those two words to use correctly with the red heifer, then I come up with a statement that ideas that have been in the minds of Jewish people, of Christians, whoever, that ideas are becoming a reality because the red heifers are there. And then when you read what I, just read in Genesis 49, it's happening at Shiloh. The nations are there, and it's a way for them to be corrected in a very special way. That personally, I've been involved in many other situations. I really have to say I'm not aware of anybody else, wonderful rabbis teaching whatever, that can have effect on the nations like what's happening at Shiloh. That's where I see what's happening now.
Larry, I just want to add, when we started talking about Shiloh and Judah, I also began to think, and I think I shared with you the idea that this really takes us back to the two sticks that's mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 39, because it goes in verse number 16. It says, "Now the Son of Man, take for yourself one piece of wood and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel and his comrades, and take one piece of wood and write on it for Joseph and the wood of Ephraim." Ephraim led the northern tribes. Judah led the two southern tribes. Now they're coming back together again. I just see that there's a whole lot happening. Also, before you get finished, I want you to note 5 cows were taken. How many cows still count?
So, 2 of them definitely. The third one had some eye problems, which doesn't completely disqualify her. They're sort of watching, but 2 definitely. One has sort of warts on the side of her neck, and the other one, which isn't actually a red heifer, isn't a red Angus. It's another breed that I've never heard of before. It's still red, but it has some white hairs, which disqualifies that one. So there's 2 of them that are definitely still qualify. A third one potential.
So technically they have 3 heifers left as opposed to the 5 that they originally started with.
Yes. And right at first, when I sort of got involved there, the space, the feed, the expense and everything, the first thing I was going to do is suggest that you get rid of the ones that don't qualify anymore. But they do have another idea that completely changed everything I'm involved in and try to help in the future. They want to artificially inseminate the ones that don't qualify, because that way they might have new little red heifers born in Israel for future situations. So that's the next phase that I'm trying to practically help, because it just needs somebody who can sort of sense animals, what they're doing, how they're doing, and that's another phase that's also being that I'm being involved in too now. So yeah.
Okay, I want to go back because my mind has been scattered. I want to go back to the cave of the columns, and I want to go back to not that cave, but I want to go back to what Glenda and Tony found that you were a part of, and that was the finding of the incense. Do you remember that story?
Yes. Okay. In '89, Sahava, Vendel's wife at that time, said, to her understanding, according to the Copper Scroll, there should be a cave further up the hill facing the south of the north. Yeah. So 4 of us went up on top of there. We were looking around and we couldn't find anything. 3 of us had given up. And again, it was Del Griffin. He was one of the 4. He was the guy that introduced me to the dig for Ashes of the Red Heifer, that complete stranger, for some reason, was telling me all this. He said, hey guys, it fell into a hole. So we went over there and sure enough, he fell into a hole. And, yeah, I guess it's okay to say now, but they took some friends up there at nighttime and started cleaning out that hole, and it came out to the front. Otherwise, we never would have found it. They had it so well hidden. So in '92, we started cleaning that out. And actually, as we went through, we came, well, you could see a layer of stones, rubble, exactly the same distance apart. Which, if you'd see that once or twice, you might say, well, it could be natural, but not after the 8th, 9th time. And actually was my son, Tony, when we were coming up, Tony Hurst and Tony and Glenda Hurst. Glenda found the larger portion back inside, but I always like to say, people that actually were involved in certain things. When he and I were up the front of the cave, there was a stone in the entrance of the cave, and there was this substance that looks like coffee grounds in front of that stone. So we showed it to Vendel, and he said, oh, that's just, it was wet from, having water jugs or something on top. So we didn't think much about it. But then later on, as we got into the cave, then Glenda was in there digging and came across a lot more coffee ground looking things. And we were tossing this stuff off the side of the hill because it didn't have any aroma, didn't know what it was. But normally in a excavation like that, if you find something different, you put it in a container, or in this case, a plastic bag. And it happened to be out in the stone in the hot sun. And then Tony Hurst came along and opened up, says, this smells like cinnamon. And Vendel says, hold everything. So we sent a sample into the Weizmann Institute. They called back right away and said, well, these are the spices that you read about in Exodus 30. So then we kept saving it, and I weighed it all, and we had 600 kilo or 1,500 pounds of the spices that were in the bottom of the cave. And right at first we thought, well, it also can't be too important because it was in the bedrock. And some of the rabbis said, no, anything that holy cannot be stored in human containers. It either has to be in stone containers or in bedrock. So it's just opposite of what we thought. Then Terry Hooter, he was a paleobotanist. He did a test on it, And in his tests, he always puts acid to whatever he's trying to check out, but usually creates a bad smell. But he said when he put the acid to this, it released an aroma that his little dog in the studio where he was doing this test sort of woke up and he smelled something. He said when he went into the house, his wife and daughter wondered what kind of deodorant or whatever he has on because they could smell it. He said that the vent pulled the aroma out of his place where he was working. And for a month later, when the conditions were right, the aroma would come down off of a tree that was right outside his, where the vent was pulling the aroma outside. It was so strong. So they say that, you know, when they used it in Jerusalem, the women wouldn't wear perfume because, you know, the aroma was so strong that it was just almost overwhelming. So yeah, those were the spices that we found in 92. And
So
then in the Copper Scrolls, it says beneath the spices, there's a purification. So that's the area that I want to focus on when we go back and dig up at the Spice Cave, where you've been at the Spice Cave, right, Steve? So beneath that, I feel that's where the Kalau or the ashes of their heifer are, underneath that Spice Cave.
Well, isn't that what the Copper Scroll supposedly is saying? From what they were reading it they interpreted it that that's where the Kalal would be underneath that spice area.
That's one part it says anyhow, beneath the spices, there's a purification. We did do a ground penetrating process there back in between 92 and 94. And it does show some sort of a cavity underneath there that we haven't explored yet. So I always say it's always speculation until you find it, but that's what we speculate. Yeah. So I feel we're that close, hopefully. Yeah. And then, like you say, after these thousands of years, the possibility of finding the ancient ones that would then be mixed in with the new ones, that there are potential new ones now in Israel. So you start lining things up and you say, this is getting interesting. So we'll see.
It is getting interesting.